Hey y'all, welcome back. I'm Nick, and I'm an American that's from a small town in the South, and I've spent the better part of the last 10 years living abroad, including the last 3 years here in Copenhagen. Today I'm going to talk you through 25 American norms that I grew up with that typically just the European mind cannot grasp. So we're going to start calm with some of the more milder ones and ramp it up to the last one that always gets a shocked face and a clear what the actual when I mention it to some of my friends who did not grow up in the US. So come along with me. All right, let's start this off with something simple. If you've ever seen a European walk into an American grocery store, yeah. Number one, endless choices. So if you've ever been to any kind of retail store, let's say a Walmart or a Target, one of the big box retailers in the US, you know that the amount of options you have is absolutely overwhelming. I was just back home a few months ago, and there were a few things that just kind of blew my mind. It had been a while since I'd been back home, and even just walking to the Oreo section in a local grocery store, there were 31 different varieties of Oreos. Here's a picture from the actual trip. There was also around 57 or 58, I think I counted, varieties of pickles. Here's that picture. And then the one that really just kind of threw me for a loop was the cereal aisle. There was a whole 50, 60-meter long cereal aisle in my local Walmart. And around, from what I could count, 300 to 400 different types of cereal. So consumerism, of course, has taken its root in the US, and you can clearly see that in the endless variety that is, in all of the retail outlets. Number two is default volume. So, as an American and as somebody that is also very loud, I can confirm this one. I think that it is super noticeable, and I can usually spot Americans from a mile away here in Copenhagen just from the volume alone. We're very loud, very outspoken. We want our voices to be heard, and I know it doesn't apply to every single person, but in general, pretty easy to spot Americans abroad simply from the volume. And I can say I am part of the problem, but I do have some brethren here in Europe that are also have a reputation of being quite loud. So if you hear somebody talking loud on the subway, it's usually one of the two. Number three is friendly strangers. I think this is something that is even further amplified in the South and the smaller towns you go. This is super, super clear. There's a country song actually that has this line in it, and it goes something like this: "Everybody knows everybody, everybody calls your friend." It's true. Everybody talks to everybody. You walk into the local XYZ, the shop, the coffee shop, everybody talks to everybody. How you doing? Good to see you. How y'all been? So there is a culture of everybody just talking to everybody. No one is a stranger. And I must admit, I quite love that. I have realized after I moved away from it that maybe a lot of this is simply gesture. Maybe people don't really care how you're doing, but I do quite love it. I love the warmness. I love a friendly greeting. And yeah, that's one thing about me that won't change. Number four is convenience obsession. In the US, there is a drive-through version of everything. The pharmacies have a drive-through. The Starbucks has a drive-through. Every single fast food chain also has a drive-through. Whether you are, like I said, getting your prescription or getting your morning coffee, there is a drive-through version of it. In my hometown, I can just think of 10 or 12 different things you can get from a drive-through. And even in the town where we typically go to the beach in the summertime, there is a drive-through ice machine where you can fill up your cooler in a drive-through. How crazy is that? Number five is somewhat in the same vein of number four, but 24-hour access. Everything that you can imagine has a 24-hour offering. In my hometown, if it is 3 a.m. and you need a car battery, you need a kayak, you need a burrito, you need to fill up your gas tank, you need a coffee, you need laundry done, there is a way to get that done. And coming from my town is a small town. You know, in American standards, maybe 50,000 people. I'll correct the number here. But you can get everything done 24 hours, and it is absolutely mind-blowing. And yes, I know I was kind of ripped apart by the Danes in the last video, but there are some 24-hour options here in Copenhagen, but not to the same extent as the US does it. I'm not saying one is right, one is wrong, but simply providing a contrast. Number 6 is Patriot mode. Everything in the USA has a big ol' American flag plastered on it. Whether it be the local car dealership with a big 100-meter wide American flag, you see the American flag plastered to everything. You know, and it goes deeper than that, this kind of sense of patriotism and nationalism. As a kid, we were actually every day, as before, you know, our school day started, we recited the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States of America. So this idea of patriotism, nationalism runs really deep. And you know, even if you see a sporting event on TV, they're going to sing the national anthem before it. And maybe that's something that is a bit more common around the world. But this sense of patriotism and red, white, and blue is such a built-in piece to being American. Number 7 is distance blindness. Everyone in the US is so used to everything being 4 hours away. Just about everywhere you're at, you know, we have to travel quite a bit. I think at the widest point, the US is around 5,000 kilometers wide. And I think that the scale that everything is on in the US is just a bit different than what the European mind is used to. So I know, for instance, one of my best friends commutes about 100 kilometers to and from every day for work, and that's quite normal. Everything is built for the automobile in the US, and everything is really spread out. I know every year for summer vacation as a kid, we used to drive about 5 hours to the town where we would go to the beach. And I know typically, you know, things just aren't so spread out. The scale is not so massive for the most of Europe. Number 8 is the tipping system. So the standard in the US is 20%. And I know that sometimes I see little implosions happening to the European brain when, you know, this is asked for, because I get it. We ask for tax on top of what the price you saw on the menu. We also ask for a 20% tip on top of that, so 25, 30% more than what you saw on the menu. It's frustrating, I get it. But also, you know, made a living in that system, you know, paying my way through college. So it is something maybe I have benefited from, but I think being away from it, I definitely like the system here in Europe a little bit better. Imagine that, paying somebody that works in the service industry a living wage. When I was working in the restaurant industry, let's say 10 years ago was probably the last time, we were paid $2.13 an hour in North Carolina. And after taxes, you know, we weren't seeing much of that. All of my income as a server, as a bartender, was on tips. So we're kind of relying on the customer to pay our salary, but that's just the way it is. And to be honest with you, I think I like the European system a little bit better. Number 9 is oversized everything. Whether it be the cars, the stores, the roads, the highways, the airports, everything in the US is just super, super sized. And I think the big one that really sticks out to me now that I've been living in Europe for a few years is the cars. You know, it is not uncommon to see these huge multi-thousand kilogram vehicles riding down the road, these big jacked up trucks that look like they're ready to pull hell off the hinges. And it's just driven by one guy as his vehicle to ride around town. And that is simply mind-blowing. I think here you see a lot of smaller, more compact cars. And it makes sense. The city streets are small, the trips that you might have to go on are not as long, so you don't need the huge vehicle. But that is the standard in the US. My first vehicle, I'll put a picture to it. It was actually not that large, but I did make it larger through some modifications. So yeah, everything is just supersized, and that's just the standard. Number 10, bulk buying culture. Everything that you may get from the grocery store or a retail store, whatever it may be, whatever you're buying, it is available in bulk. Thanks to our friends Walmart, Costco, and some of the stores like that. I remember as a kid, I had a friend who really loved Gatorade, which who doesn't? It's great. It's a sports drink, it's a soda, it's everything you want it to be. But I remember his mom used to go to Costco to buy these Gatorades and buy the 500 ml version in a 48 pack. Who needs 48 Gatorades? So some of this stuff may come as a shock, but the good news is, and especially for those living in Copenhagen, the folks at Costco have gone international and they have just opened up a Costco in Malmö, Sweden. So if anybody is living in Copenhagen, I'll put a link to that here and you can check out the American expansion in Sweden. Number 11 is healthcare roulette. When you go to the doctor, when you go to the dentist, any kind of healthcare you receive in the US, typically you have no idea what you are about to be charged. Is there going to be a copay? Did I hit my deductible? Does this even qualify under my insurance? It is a system that is created to be confusing, to benefit a few. I won't dig too deep into the rant, but just as an example, a friend of mine who did not have insurance because he is self-employed, a few years ago fell in the middle of the night and actually fractured his skull. And spent 2 days, I think 3 days in the hospital and had to have a surgery to relieve some of the bleeding on his brain. But when he got that bill from the hospital, it was around $103,000. Yeah, that is just a broken system and, kind of a system that I have really enjoyed being away from, living in Europe. And, I think that, especially here in Denmark, they've got it figured out. Number 12, avoiding the doctor. This is something that I myself am guilty of. Me and ChatGPT have become good friends. And I think that me, like a lot of Americans, avoid going to the doctor whenever we can because, we never know what we're going to get charged. Is it going to be covered? Is there going to be a deductible? Is there going to be copay? The brain explodes. So with that, you have people that, may have serious issues but do not go to the doctor. Case in point, my older brother. Last year, he was having some complications and some upper abdomen soreness, pain that wouldn't go away. It kept getting progressively worse and finally decided, you know what? Maybe I am going to go to the emergency room. Oh, yeah, that is only because his lung collapsed. So there is this culture of not going to the hospital when you need it because the healthcare system is so confusing. So it is something super common in the US. And there is a good ending to the story with my brother. He unfortunately was diagnosed with large B-cell lymphoma, but after a couple of rounds of chemotherapy, he was able to beat it and has now been in remission for about 7 months. So there's a good ending to the story. Number 13, holiday commercialization. So during the time of the year that is right now around Christmas, you see it the most. every store that you go into in the US is plastered with Christmas decorations, Christmas cookies, Christmas candies, Christmas everything. And it's not just Christmas, it's every holiday. It is even, the ones that were maybe made up. Valentine's Day, Easter, every holiday that you can think of has been absolutely commercialized, and they have figured out a way to make money out of it. So every one of those big retail stores that you go in has a big focus on getting some of your dollars in their pocket in the name of that holiday. So, not something you see quite as much here in Denmark. They do love their holidays, and I do love some of the cool intricacies and things like the julekalender here in. Speaking of, I realized I didn't get my chocolate bar today from my julekalender, but there still are these things here, but just not on the same level as it is in the US. Number 14 is school spirit identity, especially prevalent around larger universities and especially in the South in the US. If somebody went somewhere to school, they're gonna have gear with that university on it, that color, hats, bumper stickers for their car. I even personally know someone that bought a colored vehicle specifically because it was the university that they went to. So this kind of school spirit, team spirit mentality, people get really married to the school or the team that they support. I know that sports are big, of course, here in Denmark, but the level of ingrainedness and how it actually becomes part of people's personality, I think is quite unique to the US. Number 15, security everywhere. No matter where you go, if it's the mall, if it is a 7-Eleven, if it is a high school football game, like I experienced most recently, there is security metal detectors for just about everything. I think that is especially shocking as it's just really something you don't really see here in the US. For instance, the high school that I went to in North Carolina, we had 2 armed school resource officers on campus at all times. And that is not uncommon. Even in some, more inner city schools, that level of security is much higher. I actually used to do a little bit of mentoring at a school in Brooklyn when I lived in New York, and to go through the security to get into school every day, students had to actually put their backpacks in a x-ray machine to get through the doors of the building. That is just something that does not exist anywhere but the US. Number 16, political theater. So this is something I have actually become quite tired of. Even as an American that has been living abroad, we still see it over here too, is the fact that American politics are a lot like a big reality TV show, like, the newest season of Love Island, where, you won't believe what kind of crazy shit happened this week. But it's true. I know I was just on social media the other day and saw, I think, a CNN run an Instagram post about, the lovely commander-in-chief calling a reporter Miss Piggy. I'll link that there just in case you want to look at it for some reason. But it does seem like politics in especially the last 10 years, and more specifically, since 2016, this has definitely been amplified and exacerbated in the US, and, just something that you do not see anywhere else. Number 17 is legal culture. In the US, there is this attitude and also kind of a real life thing that you need to be ready for, in that basically anybody can sue anyone for just about anything. I guess it just depends on how good your attorney is. I know there are some classic cases that have gotten some attention around the world, like the infamous McDonald's hot coffee lawsuit. I'll link more to that here. Then also in 2013, Subway was sued because they had this famous $5 foot long sub a sandwich that, people could eat, and it actually, a lot of different consumers measured it out to only being 11 inches. So they were able to sue Subway. And one of my favorite ones, 2014, a man sued Red Bull because he claimed that Red Bull actually didn't give him any performance advantages, and actually settled with Red Bull for something like $13 million. This is just crazy to me, and I think that, kind of this lawsuit mentality and culture is just not something that the European brain thinks about. Number 18, aggressive customer service. So this is one thing that's been a bit of an adjustment of me living in Denmark, living abroad, is that the almost aggressive level of customer service is a very, very American thing. I know that when you go out to eat in the US, within seconds there's somebody back at the table making sure your first bite was okay, making sure you're taken care of, your drink has been refilled for free, making sure that everything is perfect at multiple times throughout your meal. You really are given almost red carpet treatment, depending on where you go out to eat, but it is more common than not that it is just very over the top and kind of, way more than would be expected in other parts of the world. Number 19 is teenage car independence. So this is always one that I think is, typically is a shock when I'm talking to maybe some friends that grew up in Europe, in that, in the US, we are able to get our learner's permit at 15 years old and are able to drive heavy metal vehicles, very fast paces down the road at 16 years old. Now, mind you, I did grow up in a small town, and my family had a piece of property out in the country growing up. So I actually started driving really early, but only on rural roads, of course. I'm actually going to pull up a picture, and my granddad actually bought me and my brother a little car to ride around on his farm growing up, that we actually learned how to drive at around 8-10 years old. And by 12 years old, I was driving a manual absolutely perfectly, no problems at all. So there is this idea that, people start driving and are dependent on the cars way earlier than my European brethren. Number 20, cowboy energy. Now, I know this is something that is definitely more prevalent in Texas itself, but in the South, and also across the US for that matter, this idea of cowboy culture is a really big thing. The big ass belt buckles, the square toe cowboy boots, the big ass 10-gallon cowboy hats, and the how are you doing, the tip of the hat to the young lady, young man. This is a real thing in the US, and I think that it's just something that is just so tricky and it's so weird to a lot of people around the world. I find it a really funny one. I think it's kind of a cool piece of American culture, definitely very specific, and some might think of it as weird, but I love something that adds character and adds like a little unique intricacy. So, cowboy culture, boy. Get it right or get lost. Number 21, military appreciation. So I think this is something that you see a lot in the US. If you go to any sort of NFL game, or let's say a NASCAR race, or any kind of big event in the US, there is a lot of times a big flyover with the, I was going to say the Hells Angels, but the Blue Angels flying over. And there are all these displays of military prowess. I know I just saw a few months ago this giant Army commemoration parade that was in Washington, D.C. that was a little shocking because, this maybe kind of looked a little bit like this. I don't know. But it is not uncommon to see all of these things, not on a daily basis, but very common for, the military and kind of these shows of power almost to be really a part of everyday kind of common culture. And look, If you made it this far, go ahead and subscribe. I'm going to be making more of these videos. Just click that little button right down. Yep, that one. Subscribe. It really helps me out a lot. Thanks. Number 22, school lockdown drills. Yeah, that is a thing. And something I actually experienced also growing up, being that, I was an elementary school student in the early 2000s after all of these crazy things like the Columbine shooting in the US. And it is something that is practiced on a monthly basis. When I was in high school, there is a lockdown protocol. There are special locks on the door just in case of some sort of tragic event. Whereas, maybe the rest of the world practices for fire drills, for that sort of thing. Nope. In the US, we practice for active shooters. And this is incredibly sad, and I hate that it's a reality, but, definitely something that is not part of life here in Denmark. Number 22 and 8/8, number 23 is the Imperial system. Guys, can we just go ahead and convert to the metric system? Everything makes so much sense. There's tens and hundreds and thousands, and everything is round and kind of works together. And then in the Imperial system, we have inches and miles and yards. Like, what? So after living here for a couple of years, I've really gotten used to it. And I think some things really, really make sense. Water freezes at 0. Water boils at 100. Rather than water freezing at 32 degrees and water boiling at 212 degrees. Yeah, it's just an easier system. Let's give it up. Let's give the Brits back their system. We beat them. We want to be different from them. Give them their system back. Here you go, guys. You can have it back. We don't need it anymore. America, get with the program. 24, the Walmart reality. So this one is a bit controversial for me because I secretly love Walmart. It is the best place in the world, especially in small towns, for people watching. But it's also extremely convenient. While I was home last time, I remember I went out around midnight, maybe 12:30, because I needed some random things. I needed a trimmer, I needed some food for breakfast, and I also needed some jumper cables for my car. And wouldn't you know, I was able to buy all of those things in one place. The variety, the prices are really just unbeatable, but of course, there are the downsides to that. While I was there, I was actually looking around in the trimmer section. There were 21 different types of beard trimmers at my local Walmart. And deodorant. That is the other thing that I needed. I needed some deodorant, and this is a picture of the deodorant aisle that I took and sent to my girlfriend, that I could not believe that there was an entire aisle with hundreds of different types of deodorant. But you name the product, there's an aisle for it in Walmart. You gotta love to hate it, but I secretly love it. Number 25, gun culture. So take a second, maybe sit down if you're not at the moment. So I am from a family that was really into hunting, outdoor sports, that sort of thing. So every Christmas, starting at about 7 or 8 years old, I actually got a gun for Christmas. I remember the first one. It was a single barrel Mossberg 410 shotgun. And then I believe when I was 13 or 14, I actually got a Ruger Mini 14, Parkerized barrel, synthetic stock, just like that one right there. Yes, that is an assault rifle. And yes, I did get that for Christmas as a teenager. I know this may be shocking, but let me just tell you, growing up so ingrained and so next to guns, it gave me a completely different perspective on them. I do realize a lot of the, gun laws and kind of behaviors around guns are atypical in the US, and I do think that there needs to be some sort of reform. It just has to change. But the second shocking piece of this is I actually grew up with a grandfather that was a gunsmith. So, whenever he would get a gun in the shop that was something that was super interesting, he'd give me and my brother a call and let us come check it out. And sometimes he'd let us shoot it. So, at about 12 years old, I got to shoot my first machine gun. So, at 12 years old, I shot a machine gun. Yes, that is right. I hope that none of you all look at me differently now, but that is simply the way I grew up, and those were the norms that I was used to and the way I was raised. All right, that's the list. If you enjoyed it, subscribe, and down in the comments, tell me which one of the norms shocked you the most. I'll take a wild guess. See y'all next time.